So my interest in last 10 years, let's say, was really, 10 plus years actually, was in making Earth data cubes. So organizing all the remote sensing data, ecological data, DM derivatives, organizing them into a system that can be used to run analysis. And I specialize in doing global analysis and global projects. And then the other thing I started doing about 4 or 5 years ago, I got interested in applying machine learning to spatial and spatiotemporal problems. And also I am increasingly interested also in making data that is actually usable to people. So I don't want that my story finishes with having a paper, you know, like this paper is published, and for many scientists that would mean, okay, the story is complete. I go, the paper is published, story is complete, let's do something else. And I change, I don't do that anymore. So rarely, really. So now when we make some science, we make sure that this data then reaches the people and that the people use it and that we have traffics of few thousand, or at least if not few thousand, then you get somebody who is really relevant to use the data. So we are trying to also get these potential natural vegetation maps to be used. So this is kind of my interest in last 10 plus years. I've been doing for about 8 plus years. I've been especially working on mapping soils. And so one of the things that came out through this process of thinking of open science and making something usable was the Soulgrid system. I don't know if you maybe used it, but if you Google soil data, there is a good chance if you need data for some country out of your region, or if you need global soil data, there's a good chance you will find Soulgrids. This is the machine learning running on a 64 cores. So again, I'm showing you this because I want to emphasize that if you want to do something more ambitious, you do need to invest into hardware, and you do need to learn how to do parallelized computing and how to optimize. So this paper, I show you the potential natural vegetation, actually happened as a bit of a spin-off of a work we did and published in PNAS. And this work was about modeling soil carbon debt. And we spoke about, when we started talking about, because we got assignment from the Nature Conservancy to do that, and we spoke about what are the ways to estimate the soil carbon debt, and then we came up actually to 3 different ways. And so one of the ways was to like calculate a potential natural vegetation, and then derive the soil organic carbon stock for potential natural vegetation, and then compare with the current status, and then the difference will be a debt. The other way was to try to find correlation between the soil carbon and land cover and land use, and then extrapolate that correlation into the past land use. And that's the actual method we use in this paper. And then the third approach was to actually do a space-time modeling, so to model changes in soil organic carbon through space-time. And this thing we discovered we don't really have data. We have data for United States and maybe a few countries, but we didn't have data globally, and definitely not for Russia or Canada, which have, let's say, 40% of global soil carbon. I think it's in these places, these countries. So in this paper we published the approach of modeling changes in soil organic carbon due to actual and past land use. But then later on I thought, okay, let's do also the first idea I mentioned you, which was to try to predict the potential natural vegetation. And that's how this paper happened. Also, I find it increasingly important, this concept of land degradation. I find it sometimes, if I read some literature, or if I communicate with people that are land degradation experts, I notice that many cases it's it's a kind of, there's a lot of discussion, and I realize there's not so much data to quantify really what is a degraded land. And degraded land is always in reference to something, you know. Everything can be a degraded land if you reference this to something more ambitious. And so what is really a degraded land? So that got me thinking about mapping the vegetation and potential natural vegetation, and then using that as a kind of objective reference to estimate what is the degraded land. And that's how this paper happened. And so I'm happy it was, as I said, it was a collaborative work. It had biologists, it had spatial analysts, people like me. It had experts in historic vegetation. And so it was I'm very happy that now it's out and the data is out. And I'm also happy this is I'm happy to publish it in PeerJ because it's really a true open access publication system, and also all the reviews and all the discussion about paper, it's visible. So it's a highly transparent system. If you want to read discussions we had with the reviewers, you can see everything. And you can see the code and you can see all the input data, so you should be able to reproduce most of the results we have. Okay, so what is a potential natural vegetation? So that's first, it's a hypothetical concept. It's not something you can go and measure outside. And it's basically, if I can define it in as short as possible way, it's a vegetation just as a function of biophysical conditions. So this is a vegetation definitely not as a function of human land use or human influence, but just purely hypothetical ecological vegetation, which is a function of purely biophysical conditions. And these are usually climatic conditions, then soil, mineralogy, relief position, etc. And the vegetation we see on the planet, it does, of course, if you will leave it untouched, you know, for a long period of time, and if there's no disturbances like ice ages and things, it will converge kind of to some kind of a natural vegetation that we call. So if you model the potential natural vegetation as today's time, where more than half of the planet has been converted to different land use systems, then you can do a comparison between something that would have been there potentially and something that is there at the moment. So you have this difference. Oh yeah, I should also mention that this work has been financed by the Nature Conservancy primarily. And we also use the GBIF data, and we use Copernicus land products. So this is the most simple classification of the potential natural vegetation, the one on the left. So you can have a managed or natural vegetation, and you can have a potential and actual. And we were looking at the potential natural vegetation. You could also map the potential managed vegetation. Now that some people are telling me that will be maybe interesting, that we continue this type of work. And that will be mapping like a cropping systems, right? And then you can compare the potential with the current, and this gives you this gap. So as you can imagine, we are now in a period where it's interesting to compare the gap between what could be potential vegetation and what we actually have. And there is also even potential natural vegetation can be different to different periods. So there is the historic potential natural vegetation, there's the current potential natural vegetation, and also with the actual natural vegetation, there's the historic potential natural vegetation, there's the current. The current potential natural vegetation, it's likely something that we could compare with the historic actual natural vegetation. So that in some periods the two will match really closely. But nevertheless, the potential natural vegetation is always hypothetical. That's not the thing you measure on the field. That's the one that you get from your model. Okay, so that's the easiest definition is that probably is that the potential natural vegetation is something that comes from your model, and the actual vegetation is something that you observed on the field. It's kind of like a predicted and observed. Okay, so when we thought about potential natural vegetation, we thought, okay, how do we quantify this? How do we map it? And we immediately noticed that it's a multidimensional problem, and that we should really try to do multiple things. So not just this is this type of forest, and this is a potential vegetation, and the actual vegetation is something else. So we looked at the problem of mapping potential vegetation first as kind of a land cover land cover classification problem, and then we also thought about we could go to the level of species, so we could map the species distribution, and we also thought about quantities of vegetation. So we thought that one very interesting quantity or property of vegetation is the FPAR, which is the fraction absorbed photosynthetically active radiation. So that's kind of effective photosynthesis. And so we assume, okay, if we can map the potential FPAR, then we can also compare it with the actual FPAR, and that will give us a gap. And this gap will be then quantitative. It wouldn't be just a qualitative difference, but we could say whether it's a 60% or 10% gap, or it's negative or positive. So that's the 3 case studies we did. So the paper is quite diverse. So basically it's almost like 3 studies in one paper. So this is when I show you. So we have qualitative and quantitative parameters. The qualitative parameters can be very general, so they can be like at the level of biomes, which is the highest level of like ecosystem types. And it could be all the way up to the level of species, right? And then you can compare the, like for example, for the forestry species, you can compare the potential distribution of 3 species with the actual. And with the biomes is the same thing. And also with the FPAR, which is a quantitative, we can then compare potential with the actual, and all these differences that you compute between the two can be used then to estimate the gains or losses in the dry matter productivity, in soil erosion or soil carbon loss, or the potential for the soil carbon sequestration, or the potential evapotranspiration. So that could be nice inputs to this type of modeling. That is the idea of the paper, basically. So to model the biophysical condition of the planet, we use a really long stack of covariates. I think it's something about 180. So we use, of course, the climatic images. And because now there are 2 data sets which are available, actually 3 data sets that were available, we do a lot of merging of the data. So we produce merged estimate of the temperatures, and also for precipitation we use a merged estimate out of 3 data sources. So we make our own new precipitation map. Because we assume if you have like 3 data sources and they are, let's say, equal quality, of maybe one is a bit better quality, then we assume that the most feasible thing to do, most sensible thing to do is to calculate an average or an ensemble out of the 3. Then we also derive a number of DM derivatives to represent the complexity of relief. We have the MODIS land surface temperature images. We didn't use that on the end because we discovered that these are correlated with the land cover, so we had to take this out. And then we have snow probability maps, we have all atmospheric images of the world, cloud fraction images, lots of data contributed by other teams, and we have the water vapor images. So there's a bunch of atmospheric images, climatic images, DM derivatives, and then we have a lithology map of the world. So I think we covered more or less all the data freely available that can be used to quantify biophysical conditions of any space, of any position in space on land surface. We even use the density of earthquakes. So This thing I just went and derived. There was no available, unfortunately, so I just downloaded the point data, earthquakes point data I downloaded. I used the R package, the SpotStat, and I just derived the kernel density map using all the earthquakes with a magnitude 3 or higher. It was like, I think, 60,000 earthquakes. So this is the biome dataset. So these are the datasets we use to train the models. This biome dataset, when I just first time I saw it available on the University of Reading, I think, website, I thought, okay, this is fantastic. It's really nicely documented. And this dataset is based on the pollen data. So this is also historic vegetation. So they have the vegetation up to 18,000 years, I think. So I said, okay, this is really great. It's really well documented. And also there's a historic vegetation. So we could do also historic potential natural vegetation. But then later on, I contacted the authors of the dataset, and they told me they're actually cleaning it up, and they were working on changing some things. And also for Brazil, we had a huge gap. So after some discussion and productive discussion and brainstorming, we decided to call the authors of the dataset on the paper. And luckily they joined us, and as soon as they joined, then we started really cleaning up the data jointly and having a very fruitful discussions, and then created a new copy of the dataset, and which I think now it's really most up to date and most complete. And so we use that new biome 6000 version dataset, which is about 10,000 locations now. This number is a bit outdated, so now it's about 10,000. So you know, it's nothing really complicated from this point on. I mean, I have the highest quality covariates, which took me years, you know, to collate, and then we just got the highest quality points, and you do overlay, and then you do machine learning, basically. And we look at, because this is a categorical variable, so we looked at the classification accuracy in kappa. And what you see is that the ranger is slightly better. These are all results of a 5-fold cross-validation. So not the results of the fitting, but the results of cross-validation with refitting 5 times. And you see that the ranger package does a bit better. This is the visualization of accuracy plotted using the caret package functionality. And I think Hannah was showing you the caret package on the day 1 and day 2. So you can see that the ranger, the random forest, comes up as a bit better than the alternatives. And you see some methods, they can have a bit higher uncertainty, and the other methods can be more like a consistently getting the same accuracy. And this is the output. This is the world without people, basically. So when we publish this paper, when we do a tweet, we always use this term, world without us. There is a book actually written, World Without Us. And so you can take a look at that. This is a couple of people got together and they said, let's discuss how would the world look like without us. And then they got the vegetation scientists and biologists and ecologists, and then they systematically thought about all the things that will be different. So that was the biome classification. I will show you that also with the actual maps, which are available for everyone to see. Then I also thought, okay, what about forest species? And the forest species, there were 2 groups that, so there was a project called EU Forest, and they released publicly also the point data for Europe. So it's about, let me see, what was the number? Almost 1 million points. I'm actually not sure anymore now, because there were lots of numbers. But it's a huge number of point observations of actual forest tree species. And in Europe, there's a European Forest Atlas that was made by funded by European Commission, and I think published by the JRC Institute. So they published this European Forest Atlas, and they said that in Europe there's about 76 3 species which are kind of dominant. So I took this list of 76 tree species, and then I took the data set they kindly put online, so just maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And so I took the data set, but I also downloaded these 76 species. You know, if you get this GBIF ID, so every taxa in GBIF has a unique ID. So as soon as I know the Latin names and maybe the local name, I can get the GBIF ID. And once I have the GBIF ID, then you can use the RGBIF package to download also the data which is publicly available. So I downloaded also the GBIF data, and I combined the 2 data sets, and I got something about 1.5 million points. With this was just doing the European tree species. I'm actually now quite ambitious, and I would like to do the whole world. Our estimate is, for example, there is another publication about Brazilian tree species, and in Brazil it's again only about 270 tree species which cover 98% of biomass. Okay, so if you have a list of these species, if you have some ground observations, you can also use it to do training, and then our hope is to make a map of all the world tree species at high resolution. This will be, my estimate is about 1,000 species, maybe a bit less, maybe 800 I hope. And then we could make 800 maps for the main tree species of the world of the potential distribution based on their historic or current distribution. But for now we did it only for the forest species. Here what we get, it's a much lower accuracy. You see accuracy now is only like 25%, 27%. So why is the accuracy much smaller? What do you think? When we did the biomes, the accuracy is like 60–70%, but when we do the species, it's much smaller.
That's the individualization of the species.
So there are a couple of reasons. So main reason is that there's three species that overlap in the niche. So actually they even have this plant community concept where some species, they come together like a brother and brother. Because they live in kind of in symbiosis. And so you have an overlap between species. So for sure then the accuracy, the classification, the hard classification accuracy has to be lower, because you will have many pixels. It could be this species or that species, or it could be a couple of species. And then also the second thing with the biomes, we had I think something like 20 to 30 biomes, but with species we have almost 80 species. And as you have more classes, then the mapping accuracy, just because you have more classes, will gradually drop. So that's also highly correlated with that. But when we had the accuracy is kind of low, but when we made the maps, they were very distinct. They were very distinct, and also when we calculated the match between the probability maps and the occurrence values of the individual tree species, then we got this actually high match. So it's just a different measure, you use a different metric, and you see that actually there's a very good match between the predictions and distribution, because the distribution of tree species, of course, is very systematic. The tree species, they have a very distinct, most of them, not all of them, but let's say 80%, they have a very distinct ecological niche. And so as long as you have the best ecological parameter maps, then you can predict, and that's known in the literature, so that's nothing new, but it was nice also to see in our case that we get this high accuracy. This is the common beech. It's one of the frequent tree species in Europe. And you can see now on the right is the distribution from a paper where they mapped the actual distribution of the species. And this is the potential on the left. And it's very easy to see that it's on the same scale, so the legend is the same, right? So you can see that there is a high gap. So this tree species has a potential to come many more places than we observe it today. The last case study we did was the mapping the FPAR. And this was a bit more complicated because we didn't have any training ground data. And for some time I was thinking, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do it, because if we don't have a ground data, it could get complicated. But I said, okay, because I insisted that we have one quantitative parameter of potential natural vegetation. And then I was looking at how could we simulate some ground data. And thanks to the protected planet, and thanks to the Intact Forest, which is the website hosted by the Greenpeace, and thanks to them we downloaded this GIS data, and so you have this map of the world which is still kind of intact or protected. So these are natural parks, and for the natural parks, which are the gray areas, for natural parks you can also see at which level they are protected. So you can take the protected planet areas which are highly protected, and you can then assume that this is also intact vegetation, intact ecosystem. And the green one is the intact forest, but this is only, the Greenpeace only mapped in intact forest. Of course, they map only the forest, so they didn't map other ecosystems. And so we said, okay, we have, I think this is about 12% of the world, or maybe 15%, which is either protected or intact. And we said, okay, well, let's use this nevertheless to train the models to estimate what is if we estimate the FPAR at these areas, and if we find correlation with the ecological gradients, then we can extrapolate it to the whole world. And so we made this complex model actually to map the FPAR through time, so for specific months. And we got a good match actually. So the R square was between 80 and 90. And so we got the FPAR is again, so the effective photosynthesis can be really well explained with ecological conditions, which makes sense. Usually it's the rainfall that makes a big difference. So the areas which get more rainfall through year, they are of course greener. And also we discovered that it's the combination of minimum, maximum, and mean temperature. These are the areas, so you see there's a lot of points for the FPAR which are in the middle, but there is also two clusters. So there are points which have a high FPAR, so this will be tropical forest. So this corner up there is tropical forest. And this one on the bottom, these are huge areas which are arid areas, because lots of the protected planet is actually semi-deserts or prairie. Okay, so lots of the protected areas. So people tell me, oh, this graph is a bit funny. It has these two peaks on the corners, but these peaks, they evolve because we tend to protect something which is either inaccessible or it's not interesting. Like the tropical forest or the mountains, they're inaccessible, they're difficult to access. And the semi-arid areas, they are not interesting, right? That's the thing we protect, and in between, it's the stuff we use. So that's why there's these two peaks. This is the prediction of the FPAR. You can see the Sao Paulo city. And blue values is the low photosynthesis. Of course, the city of Sao Paulo, it's a big area, and of course it's not as much as green as surroundings. And you can see if you will put the potential FPAR, the green mass would have been much higher. So that's kind of obvious. Everywhere you have a city, it's going to get greener. And this is for Africa. For Africa, you see now there's a huge gap. So we discovered that it's a huge gap, especially the west coast. It could have been much greener than it's now, and also the tropical jungles in the Central Africa, they could be much greener. So that's the gap we mapped. And then we showed for a specific point. So you can now take, with our maps, you can take any point in the world, and you can then analyze what is the actual biome, what is the potential biome, which tree species will come as optimal. Not only that you can say which single tree species, but you can say that the most optimal first, second, third tree species. And you can also then look at the FPAR. FPAR is we map through the year. So you can see this is a spot in Spain, and this is a cropping field in Spain, and you can see that their FPAR, actually the actual FPAR, it's for when they do the cropping in February, March, it's actually higher than the potential. So they do affect, the agriculture is effective. I mean, so when you do cropping system, you get the land become greener than with the forest. But the problem is that then you do the cropping system, and then you have in summertime it's dry, and then it's just a bare ground. And then the FPAR drops very low. And so then you can see that if it was some, I think, let me see, what was the biome and tree species. So this will be a Quercus silex and Pinus halepensis, Pinus brutia forest. So that will be kind of an open Mediterranean forest. And if it was this vegetation, then it would have been, in average, it would have been greener, except for the February-March month. In average, it would have been greener, and the gap we calculated, I think it was 55%. Sorry, it says only 55. So 45% was the gap in the cumulative photosynthesis. And so that's something now, we feel that now we are slowly entering an era where we can maybe calculate a quantitative estimate of loss of land potential. And that we can estimate it and we can map it through the months of the year. Not only, just general estimate, but we can actually pinpoint in which months are the most problematic. So we, as a conclusions, so potential natural mutation is not a myth, it's a hypothetical concept. But what I'm happy that we managed to prove that we can get a relatively high prediction and classification accuracies. The higher the accuracy, the easier to convince people, of course, because we have some uncertainty for anything we estimate, and as the uncertainty gets more narrow, then you have a higher impact on the public opinion. And so we would like to raise that awareness. We would like that everybody in the world, if they go to some point, that they should be aware that the potential vegetation here could have been this, and the potential photosynthesis could have been, and potential soil carbon would have been this. Yes, you're working on that?
No, you need an app for that.
We need an app, yes. We would like to make like to make it accessible, and also for the people that are not GIS experts. So if somebody would just go and say, I'm working on my field, I'm working in some area that somebody thinks it's degraded, and I would like to see, well, if it's degraded, how much is it degraded? And what could be it converted to? And so that's a hope. I think this value of this map is it's likely going to grow. So we are now trying to make, as I told you, we finished the first step, which is testing the methodology and seeing what's the best way to do. And now we would like to go through the finer resolution mapping, so 250 meter. We would like to do all tree species of the world. And we would like to improve this FPAR modeling because we use the Copernicus land product, which is based on 3-year data. Now it's already 4-year data, so we'd like to slowly improve that. And we'd like to make a system that can be updated, so we make like just versioning of the maps. Random forest in this case studies I showed you did come up as the best predictor. So that's a discussion about that. But it's secondary, so it doesn't matter that we got random forest as the best. We would like to switch slowly to doing ensemble predictions. That is definitely something most interesting. So the same way we do ensemble of the covariates, we also like to do, when we do predictions, ensemble of the like 2 or 3 best models. Yes, something about, this is, I think, this XKCD illustration of machine learning. Many people I see used it, so I also use it in my talks. So it is a bit discouraging that people think that with machine learning you just throw more data, and if you don't get results you don't like, you just throw more data so it pulls in the direction you want. But I think they were actually wrong. So it is powerful machine learning, and it is a good framework. But you have to be careful what you do. It's much more sensitive to extrapolation and noise than using some traditional statistical methods. And so you have to just be careful. It requires you actually to be a better statistician. It's not like this thing indicates that, like many people think now with machine learning, it's just a press of button. It's just like you get the data and you say, okay, I use caret, and you get in 2 lines. You get like it tells you the best models and tells you, you know, this is the machine learning thing to use. But it's not the press button. And actually, I realize now that I have to boost my knowledge of statistics, because for me, machine learning is largely also just statistical learning. In random forest, it's decision tree, and this is the decision tree which you know has also distribution, and there's the uncertainty model, so that and also when you do any bagging or any type of models they use for training, they are kind of also like a cross-validation, which is very common in statistics. So it's really just statistics, which is a bit more sophisticated, it's more complex. So if you call the machine learning statistical learning, you're not making a big mistake. Except there are some methods in machine learning, like the neural nets, which don't really come from statistics. They really originated from a separate path, and there's still debates on how do you estimate the probability distributions and how do you match it with anything in statistics. So there are some methods in machine learning that really originate from different roots. Okay, so this was the slides, and now I'm going to show you that we're going to give a short demo of the processing in the based on this repository. So this repository has a directory called tutorial, and this tutorial contains this tutorial which explains the steps. So this is not the reproduction of the paper. This is a tutorial which is a subset, because the paper is complex. So this is just a subset of the data and a subset of the problems, so you can run it on your laptop, because otherwise of course you cannot run the type of analysis I run on this high performance computing systems. You cannot run it on your laptop. So I created a little subset. And you see you can load instead of loading the point data in the covariates, what I prepared is a regression matrix. And this regression matrix contains, for the biome data set, you see there's 8,600 points on the end, which have all the covariate values and biome class. And you see there's the longitude, latitude, and then you have a list of all these covariates. This landform, so this is a landform class from the USGS Eco Tapestry project, and then you have also lithology. So there are lithology classes. All the covariates which we use which are categorical, I typically immediately convert to indicators, because I prefer to have all the covariates quantitative. It's just the handling of data and also amount of methods you can use. It's much wider. So you see, this is a long list. It's really a long list. It's even when it's truncated, I mean, it takes me some time to scroll through. So this is just to give you an idea. And then when you look at the biome classes, these are the biome classes. The most frequent class is the cool mixed forest, I think. And then also the other frequent classes is the steppe and the temperate deciduous broadleaf forest. So these are the classes. This is just a simple simple explanation how you can then generate a formula. You know, I'm not going to write the formula by hand, right, to define the target model. So I don't write the formula by hand. I use a paste function. I paste all the names in the covariate list, and from this covariate list I exclude some of the names. So I don't want to use the latitude or longitude or the country name or the land cover or the protected planet value or the bioclimatic zone. So I don't want to use that. And so I exclude some of the covariates, and then all the other covariates, I just paste them with the collapse plus, and then you get this real long formula, right? So this is the model that we're observing. And so this covers all the relief parameters, climate parameters, atmospheric images, lithology, landform, etc. And if I fit just the ranger, just straightforward random forest, I get the accuracy of about 70%, mapping accuracy 70%. So that looks quite promising, right? And that's the plot that we made. So then if we want to make it a bit more sophisticated, so we want to go and look at the other possibilities, we can use a couple of frameworks. One of the frameworks is the CARET framework to do an evaluation of models and fine-tuning of models. The other framework is the MLR, and I think you heard about the MLR also from Hannah on Tuesday, I think. And there's a third framework which is called the Super Learner framework. And so I think I look here. So this is the predictions. Yes, this was just doing the predictions and then doing the plot in Google Earth. So here I looked at the MLR package, and we were talking about the spatial cross-validation. So if you are interested in running that with your own data, you can mimic some of this code. So in the MLR package, you can first specify the type of learner. So we're doing a classification ranger, and we want to predict probabilities. And you can run this MLR, you can run also in parallel, which is very important because it's much more computational than just doing ranger. But you can run it in parallel. And this is how you run it in parallel. So there's a parallel map package. And this will with this function, I will use all of the cores. And then when I do the resample, will go and do a 5-fold cross-validation with refitting and repeat it 5 times. And then as a measures, we take again accuracy and the weighted kappa. And what happened is that the accuracy is now 33%. So it went from 60 or 70% to 33%. And that's a bit discouraging, right? But so there was some discussion, I think Nick started some discussion, whether this is too pessimistic, because this spatial cross-validation is very strict. So if you have any feature which is very continuous in space, it will have a low classification accuracy, because the things are continuous. So as soon as you move out from the space, then you will see that the differences are very high from the classification at shorter distances. So what I suggest to people, if you are not certain now which is the correct accuracy, is it the 70% or 35%? So I recommend to people is just report both. So write that the accuracy of prediction of modeling that feature is between 35% with a strict spatial cross-validation to 70% ignoring the spatial position of points. Okay, that was the results for the biome, and this is the modeling for the FPAR. FPAR it's much more complicated because so it's much bigger data sets, 200,000 training points, and also it's a kind of a space-time. So the model looks like this. So we model the distribution of F-bar also as a function of the month of the year. And some of the covariates we used for them, so we have a precipitation for January, then we use that to predict the F-bar of January. Okay, so it's a kind of a, not a complete full space-time model, but it's definitely a space-time model. It's a space-time model that tries to model seasonality within the year. Some of the covariates, the XP, the X3 covariate, these are the ones that don't change through the season. So like a slope map, right? This doesn't change. But the precipitation and daytime and nighttime temperatures, they do change through year. And so then we want to match the F-bar of January with the temperature and precipitation and snow from the January, and the F-bar of July with the July covariates. Okay? So it's a bit more sophisticated, and this is now explained here how you do that in, how do you model it, how do you do these things with month-specific or, so month-specific climate. And now when we do a ranger on this, we get R square is a 0.9. So it's a quite satisfactory R square. You see the number of points. We start with 180,000 points. So there's no point to do that for tutorial. So we subset to, I think, 5%. It's a 5% subset. And which are the covariates which determined the, as I said, the F-bar. If I look at the importance, variable importance list, it usually is the precipitation. Precipitation, and there are some bioclimatic variables that come from the Chelsea dataset. And the cloud fraction. But precipitation is the, so you see this precipitation variable name, this precipitation name, this is the monthly precipitation, and this is the total annual precipitation. So either the monthly or the total annual precipitation determine the F-bar the most important. But the temperatures also come, the minimum temperature, right? This also comes as something important. And then once you predict the F-bar, you can predict it. This is just for a single tile. Remember, I do everything by tiles. And so this is how it looks like. This is the potential natural vegetation F-bar predicted for 12 months. And what happens, of course, it goes from in winter, if it's a northern hemisphere, then it goes in winter times, it's just low. And then in July and August, it's on the peak, and then in September, again, it starts dropping. So that makes sense. And so that's the F-bar through year predicted. Did you ever see any type of modeling similar to this? For the F-bar or for the mapping of biomes or tree species? How many of you are in species distribution mapping or vegetation mapping? Okay. Well, I like this example because it's a bit of space-time modeling. I like it. It's about making maps and data which are potentially relevant to people, like to general public. I'm not talking about scientists here. You know, if you make a map of the planet without humans, or map of cities, how they could look like if there was no cities, this is common people can use that maps and understand them. So and that's why I realized that it's not just writing a paper, but you have to do this. You have to also put these maps online, and you have to kind of prepare them in a way that people can easily read them. And so we made these map stories. So I will show you some of the map stories. So as soon as I have the maps, I will put them in a GeoServer, and then I will connect to the Esris storytelling. Let's see. So I'll just show you some of the things we made. So this is this project we did. As I said, I put the maps in GeoServer, I put the points in GeoServer. So you can see the biome points, and you can see the results of prediction, and you can zoom in anywhere in the world. This is the FPAR, and you can see this is this potential FPAR, and I'm not sure which month is this. No, this is the total annual. So this is all months sum up. And so you can see how the world would look like if you had only a natural vegetation. And these are the 3 species. And if I zoom in into some country, you can see these are actually quite detailed estimates of where would some species come. Because the machine learning can really force to come very close to the points. I can show you also a point map of Europe with all the 3 species, and you will see that the predictions try to really come close to where the observed trees are. So sometimes this is a bit artifact of random forest, that he has this point, so like this pattern where you see individual things. But it's a quite detailed prediction. This is the difference between the mean annual potential FPAR and the actual. And the pink color indicates a loss, okay? So of course what happens is that we see all the areas in Brazil that were rapidly converted into some cropping systems, that they are now less green over the year. And that's the thing I showed you also with the example of Spain. But there are countries in the world that we discovered that the countries are greener than if they were under natural vegetation. One of the examples is the Egypt and the delta of the Nile River. So if I zoom in here, so you see it's much greener than if it was a potential natural vegetation. So given the climatic conditions of that area, the temperature and rainfall, this area should have been with much less vegetation. So there's all these examples where the things get much greener. Also, I think parts of Israel are much greener than if it was a natural vegetation. And most of Netherlands, if I look at the Netherlands, it will be, so the Dutch people should be really proud of themselves because they made their land much greener, except for the cities. And this is the Randstad area. This is the triangle where it's like 6.5 million people or 7 million people. And this area is less green than it could be. But in average, the whole of Netherlands, we calculate it's about 40% greener than if it was just so a delta. So that was one story. Is anybody using these story maps? No, nobody. Well, okay, it's good then that I show this because you can really do some nice comparison, and you can see how you can tell stories. This is a nice. There's a nice functionality in Esri. You can do this swiping maps, so you can have a left and right map. And so here, what you see, it's the Europe with people, and this is Europe without people. So that will be the difference. Everything you see white, it's either agriculture or urban areas. Would you like me to zoom in somewhere? No? Let me take a look at Brazil. So this is Brazil with people and without. This is just the biomes, not the F-power tree species. And these are these training points we use for the classification. So I just wanted to show you can do very simple to use web maps that you can share. But I think Tim was showing you also the map view package, and there is a link on the Google Plus that shows how to make also stories with a leaflet. So that will be an open source solution, except then you have to host it yourself, right? You need to put on your own server. But these maps, by the way, the Esri doesn't host the raster maps. I was a bit disappointed with that, and I asked them how could they get the maps, and they said no, only you have to then put data in the Esri mapping service, and so you have to have an account and everything, their cloud solution. But you cannot just say, I want to share my data with people. It's not the rasters, only the vectors. And I only work actually now, I don't believe anymore in the vector world. I think it's a fake world. The only real world is the raster world. As soon as I get some vector data, I convert to rasters. So they're not so friendly. So this raster data, you see, they're on my server in my office. So actually, I made this map and I made the data. This is just a wrapper on top to be able to tell the story. So you kind of, today you could go and use this and make the whole presentation like slides, you know. So traditional slideshow, like you write a text and you put a static image, but you could now also make like a slides which will contain the maps. So you will tell like a story with the maps. And so you could zoom in and anybody could zoom in, and so it will be very interactive. Also, what is not nice is that like you have this functionality that you will select a point and then you want to query the values, but yeah, that something's not working. So I noticed it's not so well done also. So anyway, I will also run some of this thing now in the code. So let's see, this was the one with the biomes. And as I said, it's a 9,000, almost 9,000 training points and 162 variables. So it's about 160 covariates. And then I can look at the structure of which are the classes that are most frequent. And then I specify this model. So this is all really straightforward, right? There's nothing really special here. And then when I run the Ranger, I can see that it uses all of my cores. That's very nice about Ranger, you see. And that makes it run, of course, 8 times faster. And then I get the model here. So when I print the model, so I see that it's a prediction error is about 30%. So if I take from 100%, I get 70% mapping accuracy. But this is the internal estimate of the prediction, and the Ranger package doesn't know that these points, they have a location, so they're spatial. I mean, so it ignores it completely. And then I can do also with the caret. This is the caret package, and you see I have a laptop, and I have 8 cores, so I'm going to use 6 cores to run a comparison to see what is the actual accuracy if I run random forest, then if I run, let me see which one is this, gradient boosting and neural networks. So I can run this comparison, and I can see then which of the method it's the most accurate. And it's again parallelization, so you specify the amount of cores you want to use, and then you run all the cross-validation. This takes time. And once you finish, you can visualize that, and then you get this plot. So then you get this plot, and that's the proof. So you can prove it for yourself that from the methods that we have available to do some kind of classification analysis, that the ranger really does come in the cross-validation, comes as the most accurate. Okay, so that makes it, I think it's a reproducible proof. Of course, if somebody comes now and says, okay, I took your data and I tried this and that and this and that, and actually I get a better accuracy if you use some new model. If you get something like this, please send me a message. We're going to use that. And we will invite you to join the next round of publication. Okay? So that was the model for the classification. And then I also show you how to do predictions. So I will just load one tile. I just take one tile, and this tile is a this tile has 142 variables. So there are actually 142 covariates. So it's a little block, but it's multidimensional, so it has 142 layers. So probably when I look at the size in the memory, let me see. Grid 1 kilometer. So how do I express it in megabytes? So it's about 36 megabytes. Even though it's a little tile, so it's a little area, but if you have 142 layers, you know, it's if one layer is I don't know, 200 kilobyte, you have many layers, and then you finish with the 36 megabytes. So be careful with that. And then we can do prediction for that tile. And then the prediction gives, let me see. This gives, for each class, it gives a probability map. So always when I do mapping of whether it's a continuous or categorical data, I'm interested in maximum precision. I'm interested in maximum detail. And when you do classification, you want to map, often you want to map each class, you want to get a probability map. And then you can plot that, we can plot that in Google Earth, and that will give something like this. So this is this little tile, and this is here around the Czech Republic. And so I just pick up the most probable class. So we are somewhere here, right? So we can see what's the natural vegetation around us. I can maybe display it a bit in 3D. Let me exaggerate a bit, make it more, okay, it's exaggerated already. So I zoom in a bit. And you see it does follow a bit landscape, so it's more like on the more elevated areas, you have this cool mixed forest. So it's a bit higher latitudes. And then we can also play with that and see how does it respond to the actual land cover. How many of you use PlotKML? Yes, I apologize, I need to update that package. I'm just too busy recently. I know what I need to update. I need to add the SF package. I need to add more parallelization. I need to fix some little bugs. But it is a really powerful way to look at the data in Google Earth. And I wrote this tutorial some like 5 years ago. I never updated, so I have to update it. So I have to just make more material. I am sure that people will go back to using it. Especially like every time you need to display something 3D, or you want to play with the transparency, or want to add vectors and rasters together and see how really well does it match with the satellite images. It is a very powerful GIS, Google Earth, and it is the most used GIS still in the world. So that was the one on just doing the ranger, then doing comparison with other methods with caret, and now this is the MLR. So I subset the points. So how does the MLR works? So I need to do a spatial cross-validation, but I have geographical coordinates. So I have to take these coordinates and I have to project them to, let's say, Mercator projection. So I can calculate the spatial locations. And then I define the spatial task. You see, that's a spatial task. And in this spatial task, I say that the coordinates exist. Okay, in the MLR, if you say I'm doing some machine learning training, but I have the coordinates exist, then you specify them. You say this is where the coordinates come from. So I use these Mercator coordinates because they're metric. It's not maybe the best system, but it's better than not having any knowledge of coordinates. And then so these are just the definitions. So I can have the machine learning with spatial knowledge and with knowing that there's a spatial problem, and without knowing. And then I will do this parallel library. Now it recognizes I have 8 CPUs, and so let me run this. What did I do wrong? I think I forgot to specify something. Start from scratch. Oh yeah, now when it gets complicated, now I have an error, but I'm now in the parallel. I'm in the parallel session. So I think I have to close this parallel session. Let me see. I don't see I close it anywhere. Yes, I don't see I closed the session, so maybe I forgot to do that in my code. Let me check. This is example. There's no example. So does anybody knows this session I start with parallel start socket? Do I have to close it somewhere? Or it looks like it's automatic. Okay. Let's try one more time. So it goes all the way to the spatial task, make classification ID. Oh, I think I'm having an old version of probably the old version of the MLR. Because it says the argument doesn't exist. Let's see, coordinates. Yes, there's nothing about coordinates. So let me see. So the debugging stuff like this, you have to really check the version of MLR. Let's see. What's the name of the package? Package something, package version, package description. Okay. Version 2.11. Lots of people working on the MLR. So let's go to the website. Yeah, so there's a 2.12. So in between they made a new version which has the coordinates. And I need to install it. Need to update it. Now best I install the one from. Yeah, I'll just install the one from the GitHub. So let's see. Okay, admit it. I've run this. I have the MLR package. But I run the GitHub I ran it on the big server, I didn't have time, so I just used 64 cores. And then I forgot to update it on my laptop. How many of you use MLR before? It's a new package for you, right? I highly recommend it. It's there's several groups in the world, as you can imagine, making machine learning functionality in Python or Java or R. And one of these groups is, I think this is primarily German group. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if I look at the list of people making the, sorry?
I think used to be in Dortmund, but now in Munich.
Okay, yes. So this is the group of authors. So it's a big group of authors. I don't know how they manage to work in such a big group, but it does work, and they do make it better and better, and they really think about things. And so it is really fantastic work. And there is a home page here. Let me see. So there's the tutorial. And there's even a blog, and so there's a lot of things happening. So it's really a very active group, and they do think about lots of specific problems, and so it's a very good framework to look at. And I started using it maybe 6 months ago. So now I installed the new version of the package. See, that went through, and now I should have this spatial functionality. So let's see. Let's go back where the problem was. Oh yeah, this is the console. So let's see, this is the... Maybe I have to reload the package. When you reinstall the package, then you have to, the good idea is to restart R. So I restarted because I need to get the exact version of the package. So now when I load the package, I need to again look at the package description. And if everything is correct, it should be 2.12. It's such a long list of authors. And I scroll through. Where is the version? 2.13. Okay, so I had the 2.11, Now I updated to 2.13, and if I'm lucky now this spatial cross-validation should work without a problem. Yes, so now we're running. The game is on. And you see it's parallel. So success. And you see it does take time. This is cross-validation with refitting. If you put a 10-fold cross-validation, so you have to fit 10 times the model. And then you can put also a number of repetitions. And on the end, we will get this thing. This is the result we get, and you see the kappa is much smaller. The accuracy is only 35%. The kappa is a bit higher, 45%. But it's much smaller than if we ignore the spatial location. Yes, maybe when I make some of the tutorials, this is not a good practice. You shouldn't make any tutorial that takes more than like 10 seconds, you know. So sometimes I like to make tutorials which are realistic, you know. So it's a realistic tutorial. You have a realistic data set, and you have something that we actually use in a paper in publication. But what happened, you see now, this is taking too long to compute. So be careful. This is not a good practice. I should subset this. I should have made it like just a subset and then run an analysis on the subset. But it's taking actually a long time to compute. And now I remember the reason why I couldn't get this running on this laptop, because I made it on this big server of 64 cores, and probably was done like in 10 seconds. Now this is taking too long time. It's not a good idea to, as a tutorial, to put something that people have to go and sit and wait now. So be careful when that run. It's only that example with the spatial cross-validation. Okay, so this was from me about vegetation mapping. So you saw the examples with classification. You saw examples with space-time, continuous variable, so something that you map through months. You saw example where you can make a paper where you also, with the paper, you package it with a code, with tutorial, and we also output maps you can put on story maps on Esri. And then you make it really accessible to people, so people can just, you know, visualize on their phone or something and look at it. This, of course, this S3 story maps, when we embed it in the website, you know, people do open it on the phone and they look at it. I also use it on the phone. I zoom in and show them this. You see German, how would it look like with natural vegetation. What else did you see? You saw that you can do spatial cross-validation. And you see that is computational. It's actually still running, but now it's done. Okay. So I put it to run for, it's about 2 minutes. 2 minutes is too long for a tutorial. What's the CRAN threshold for our packages?
5 seconds
for the examples. You can have 10 seconds maybe.
You have to argue with them.
Yes, you can convince them. You say, oh, this has to be like this. So it can be a 10-second, but it cannot be 2 minutes, definitely. So yes. Any questions or comments? Something you really liked or something you think it can be better? Yes, Chris?
Yeah, I have a question.
Maybe we use a microphone, just a second.
Maybe it's a bit out of topic, but I was punished, I think, for more than a decade in the discussion equilibrium, non-equilibrium, and potential vegetation, you know. So I don't want to bring up this discussion at all, but what you showed us from the concept is that the whole world is equilibrium. Even if you take the biomes, they are also a holistic classifier for this. So how you would integrate this non-equilibrium of half of the world for predicting? Because this is for me a basic concept you have to integrate, because you are taking fractions of vegetation, and that means that the vegetation sometimes is flowering or flourishing. Desert sometimes is there, sometimes is gone. So you have to, and not by a regular training. By training meanings you cannot reach this. This is a concept. This is also
yes,
a concept
it's hypothetical.
So
yes.
how you would integrate this?
Yes. So okay, just to introduce everyone to what you're trying to say. So vegetation is always changing. Okay. So vegetation is always changing, and there's no such thing as stable, permanent vegetation. It doesn't exist. But if you zoom in on a like 1,000-year scale, and if you exclude, some extreme events like, asteroid falling or sudden ice age or some eruption of a huge eruption. So if you exclude these extreme events, then on a scale of 1,000 years, biologists do agree that if you look at the species and how they interact, they will fall in a process of self-organizing itself. So the ecosystem kind of gets self-organized. And this self-organized version, that's what they call this equilibrium, right? And so you can it's a hypothetical, but on a scale of like 1,000 years or 100 years, you can observe it. I mean, it's been proven, you can see it. If there are no disturbances. Also like a flood, a big scale flood can disturb vegetation, so it changes. But so if you exclude the disturbances, then you could reach this relatively stable status of vegetation and ecosystem, where the ecosystem kind of self-organizes itself. But it's still hypothetical, because there are always disturbances, again. There will always be, volcanoes and earthquakes and floods and hurricanes and asteroids, so that's why it makes they're still hypothetical. But what we discovered that if we have this data from the past, so prehistoric data, or if we have a data from a present time, and it's just picturing the natural vegetation, so taking out the influence of humans, then we discovered that it's systematic. And if it's systematic, then we can extrapolate it. So we don't try to predict what the status of vegetation is like actual, but we're just trying to predict the potential as a reference. So it's just a reference, basically.
I got this, and I don't want to extend it, but you cannot predict potential natural vegetation for areas where by concept they cannot exist. And in the non-equilibrium systems, there is no climax vegetation. So I was asking how we could integrate this in this kind of training,
How do you integrate? I'm not sure. That will require some brainstorming. I'm not sure. Maybe it's not possible. Also, we had this discussion with the biologists, for example, for the forestry species. Look at the forestry species. You have forestry species which appear only on one continent or on some island. And you have also forestry species which are extinct. There are not many, but there are some that are extinct. So when you map the potential natural vegetation, do you include also, do you map, beach or something in Australia or in Latin America? Should you do that? And then we discovered there's these different types of potential natural vegetation projects. You can do ones where you don't deal with the endemic species or local species. And then you can also you can say, okay, let's take this species and just consider its ecology, and let's see where would come on the planet. Just like if you do like a physics experiment, right? So something between physics and botany. Right? But then the conservationist says, no, you cannot move the species, you cannot. So, but look, I said it's just hypothetical. So we just see if this species will be introduced on some other place, where would it grow, So you can do that based on the ecological niche. So there are different flavors of potential natural vegetation mapping, and sometimes it's tricky. I feel it's okay, it's hypothetical, and you know it there are many of the terms in biology, they were popular for some times, then later on got really criticized, they're very controversial, like one of them is this climax concept and things. And I don't want to go to that area, I don't want to do, but so what I just try to do, show that if you have information about status of natural vegetation in the past or in the areas where it's still, let's say, intact, that you can extrapolate that information if you can correlate it with ecological gradients, and you can extrapolate it and you create a reference. And this reference is not absolute truth, but it's better to have some reference than no reference. That's my opinion. Yes. Any other comment? Okay, let's go for coffee break. Thank you.